Hi everyone. Welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. When Mike discovers his wife Lisa's secret affair with her coworker Roger, he waits until their anniversary party to reveal the shocking truth, leaving Lisa, Roger, and everyone in their lives stunned by his ultimate act of revenge. So let's start. It's quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles into a house after years of noise, chaos, and laughter have seeped into the walls. You don't notice it at first. It sneaks in gradually, like a shadow growing longer as the sun sets. Lisa's out running errands. She said she'd only be grabbing groceries, but knowing her, she'll probably come back with a few extras. A scented candle, a new dish towel, or maybe even a little surprise for me. That's just how she is. Thoughtful to a fault. We've been married for 24 years, and next month will mark the big milestone, our 25th anniversary. A whole quarter of a century. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I could still picture the younger version of myself, pacing nervously with a ring hidden in my pocket, rehearsing my proposal over and over, hoping I wouldn't make a fool of myself. Time flies in a way that feels unfair. Now here we are, our two kids, Josh and Megan, grown and off living their own lives. And this house, which once seemed too small to hold all of us, now feels cavernous and cold. Josh is finishing his last year of college, and Megan's in her second year. It's strange not having them around. This place used to be alive with energy. Josh blasting music from his room, Megan arguing with Lisa about staying out late. There was always someone coming or going. But now it's just the two of us. And when Lisa heads out, it's just me. I figured I'd better get moving. Lisa would tease me if she saw me lounging in bed this late, calling me a lazy old man. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, grabbed the bottle of vitamins from my nightstand, twisted off the cap, and shook one into my hand. Or, at least I tried to. The pill bounced off the edge of my palm, rolled off the table, and, because that's just my luck, ended up right under the bed. With a frustrated sigh, I crouched down to retrieve it. The space beneath the bed was darker than I expected, and the faint scent of dust tickled my nose. I reached around blindly, my fingers brushing against stray lint, a forgotten sock that must have been Josh's. And then something else, something thin and crinkly, something that didn't belong. Curiosity piqued. I pulled it out, squinting to get a better look. The moment I realized what it was, my stomach dropped like a stone. A condom wrapper. I sat there on the floor for a few seconds, just staring at it. My mind went blank, and then, all at once, it started racing. Who the hell could this belong to? No one else had been here. No visitors. No parties. Just me and Lisa in this house for the past few months. And then the realization hit me, hard and fast. I had a vasectomy after Megan was born. It was a decision we made together. We both agreed 2 kids were enough. So why, in God's name, would there be a condom wrapper under our bed? The thought I didn't want to entertain started creeping in, uninvited. Lisa is having an affair. My chest tightened, anger bubbling to the surface like molten lava. But I clamped it down. What was I supposed to do? Burst through the front door, waving the wrapper around like it was some sort of damning evidence? That wouldn't get me anywhere. She'd deny it. Or worse, she'd turn it around on me. No, I needed more than this flimsy piece of plastic. I needed proof. Real proof. I got up, threw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed my car keys, and headed out. Suddenly, the house that once felt so familiar now felt foreign. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, everything seemed suspect. I needed to talk to someone, and I knew exactly who. Frank Dawson. Not the pirate from that famous movie. The real Frank Dawson, an old friend of mine and one hell of a private investigator. We met back in our Navy days, and the nickname stuck long after he left the sea to work the streets. If anyone could help me find the truth, it was Frank. When I walked into his office, Frank was sitting back in his chair, feet propped up on the desk, sipping from a mug that looked like it had seen better days. He glanced up as I entered, a wide grin spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't Mike Turner," he said, standing to shake my hand. "To what do I owe the honor?" I hesitated. The words felt heavy, stuck in my throat like a lump I couldn't swallow. But eventually, I told him everything. About the condom wrapper, the doubts gnawing at my mind, and the pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Frank listened carefully, his face growing more serious with each passing second. He nodded occasionally, never interrupting. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "All right, Mike, I'll help you out," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Give me a week, and I'll see what I can dig up. But before we go down this road, there's something you need to think about. If this is what you're afraid it is, you need to be prepared for what comes next. Talk to a lawyer. Figure out where you stand financially. If this ends in divorce," he let the words hang in the air. My stomach churned, but I knew he was right. "Yeah," I murmured. "I'll do that." Frank stood and clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll get to the bottom of this." I nodded, thanked him, and walked out of his office. But the condom wrapper still felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. A couple of hours later, I found myself sitting in the office of Richard Blake, one of the best divorce lawyers in town. The man was a shark, plain and simple. He leaned back in his chair, watching me with a gaze so sharp it felt like he was peeling away layers of my skin to see what was underneath. They didn't call Richard Blake the top divorce attorney in town for no reason. The man had a reputation, and not for being kind or gentle. He was a shark, through and through, the kind who could sniff out weakness and pounce without hesitation. If anyone could give me a no-nonsense, brutal assessment of my situation, it was him. After I laid out the whole messy story, the condom wrapper, my suspicions, and everything swirling in my head, I sat quietly, waiting while Richard scribbled notes on his legal pad. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper felt like nails on a chalkboard. Finally, he looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. "Mike," he said, his tone measured and direct, "if this is heading where you think it is, you're looking at losing half. Half of everything. Your savings, the house, your retirement fund, all of it. California law doesn't care who did what. It's a community property state. That means a straight 50-50 split." His words landed like a punch to my gut. Half. Half of everything Lisa and I had built over the years. Half of the life I'd worked my ass off to provide. It stung like hell, but deep down, I already knew one thing for certain. I could lose my house, my savings, even my future plans, but I wasn't going to stay married to a woman who betrayed me. Richard must have seen the look on my face because he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "If you're serious about this, my advice is simple. Stay cool. Don't give her any reason to suspect that you're onto her. If she catches on, she'll lawyer up fast and things will get a hell of a lot messier." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. "I'll do my best," I said quietly. By the time I left Richard's office, I felt like I'd run a mental marathon. I was drained, but there was also a sense of determination growing inside me. If I wanted to get through this, I had to keep my emotions in check. When I got back home, Lisa was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like it was any other ordinary day. She glanced up when I walked in, her face lighting up with a warm smile. She looked so normal, so unaffected. It made my chest tighten with a mix of anger and sorrow. But I forced myself to smile back, keeping my expression neutral. "I've got a business trip coming up," I said casually, leaning against the counter. "I'll be out of town for the whole week." Lisa didn't question it. "All right," she replied with a nod, returning her focus to the cutting board. That night, she slipped into bed beside me, her hand brushing gently against my arm. I could feel the familiar warmth of her body, the way she leaned closer, her intentions clear in the way she touched me. "Come here," she murmured softly, her voice carrying that unmistakable tone. But I couldn't do it. "I'm tired," I said flatly, my voice lacking any emotion. She paused for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh and rolled over, turning her back to me. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. Was I wrong? Was I jumping to conclusions? What if the condom wrapper wasn't hers at all? What if it was Josh's? He'd stayed in our room for a few nights before heading back to college while his room was being repainted. Maybe it had fallen out of his pocket. But then again, what if I was right? What if Lisa was cheating on me? The questions wouldn't stop. They gnawed at me, tearing apart every shred of peace I had left. But in the end, I knew there was no turning back now. I had to see this through. The next morning, I woke early, packed a small bag, and booked a cab. Lisa barely stirred when I grabbed my things and quietly left the house. Her soft breathing filled the silence as I closed the door behind me. The drive out of town felt surreal. The cityscape gradually gave way to long stretches of open road and scattered buildings. Eventually, I pulled up to a rundown motel, a place that was cheap, clean enough, and anonymous. Perfect for what I needed. After checking in, I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The hours dragged by painfully slowly. It was nearly evening when my phone buzzed. It was Frank. "Mike," he said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "Lisa just left the house. She checked into a motel." My heart skipped a beat. "Which one?" There was a pause on the other end before he answered. "The same motel you're at." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The weight of the silence in my room pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. The thought of Lisa being here, right here in this place, was unbearable. When Frank called again, his voice was steady, but there was a tension behind it. "Mike, listen carefully. She's in the room next to yours. The room next to mine. Don't confront her," Frank continued, his tone firm. "This isn't the time or place. Just step outside. Go cool off. You don't want to make a scene." But I couldn't do it. "No, Frank," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "I need to know. I need to hear it for myself." Frank sighed heavily. "All right," he said, frustration seeping into his voice. "But don't do anything stupid. Promise me." "I promise," I muttered, the phone trembling in my hand as I hung up. Minutes crawled by like hours, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, through the thin motel walls, I heard voices. At first, the words were muffled, just indistinct sounds. Lisa's voice and a man's deep, unfamiliar tone. But then, as I strained to hear, the words became painfully clear. They were having sex. Lisa's voice, once so familiar and comforting, was now something else entirely, filled with desire I hadn't heard in years. My stomach twisted into knots as the man's voice cut through the air. "I don't know why you're still with him," the man said, his tone dripping with disdain. "The guy's old, washed up. He can't satisfy you, can he?" "No, he can't," Lisa replied, her voice breathless and raw. "You're the best I've had in a long time." The words sliced through me like a blade. Every syllable was a reminder of what I had lost. Or maybe what I never really had. "He's just too old now." Lisa's words hit me like a sledgehammer. Her tone wasn't angry or resentful. It was cold and different, as if she were stating an obvious fact. Then I heard the man's laugh. Cruel, mocking. "So, why are you still with him?" His voice dripped with amusement, as if he already knew the answer. Lisa didn't hesitate. "Because I need him to keep the bills paid. Now shut up and do what you're good at." My heart clenched and my stomach twisted in knots. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, every muscle in my body locked tight. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Their laughter from the next room echoed in my ears, eating away at my composure. Each sound was like acid dripping into an open wound. I couldn't take it anymore. I shot to my feet, fists clenched, my pulse pounding in my ears. My body screamed to act, to storm through that door and end this nightmare. But just as I took a step forward, the door to my room creaked open. Frank stood there, his expression hard and unflinching. He knew exactly what I was about to do. "Don't," he said sharply, his voice steady but firm. "Let me go." I hissed, trying to yank my arm free, but Frank didn't budge. His grip tightened. "Listen to me, Mike." His tone left no room for argument. "They've left the window open. I've got my camera set up, recording everything. You'll have all the proof you need. But if you barge in there now, you're the one who ends up behind bars. And that'll ruin everything when it comes to the divorce." I glared at him, my vision blurred with rage, my chest heaving with each labored breath. "I don't give a damn about the divorce," I spat through clenched teeth. "I want them to pay." Frank stepped closer, his voice unwavering. "And you will. But not like this. Think. If you lose control now, you lose everything." His words hit me like ice water. Slowly, the fire in my chest dulled, replaced by a crushing wave of grief. I slumped back onto the bed, my head in my hands. I felt broken, shattered. The woman I had trusted for more than 2 decades was in the next room, destroying everything we'd built together. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. After a long silence, I lifted my head, my jaw set, my fists still trembling. She might take half of what I've got, I muttered, my voice low and steady. But I'll ruin her. Like she ruined me. Frank nodded once. We'll get there, he said quietly before stepping out of the room. Once he left, I sat there in the dim light, my mind spinning. My body felt like dead weight. The plan was simple. Stay out of sight for 3 days while Frank gathered more evidence. That was the deal. But sitting in that room, knowing what was happening just a wall away, was torture. By the time Frank called again that night, I was pacing the floor, fists clenching and unclenching as Lisa's voice replayed over and over in my mind. She and the guy left the motel, Frank said, his tone calm, methodical. I've got a positive ID on him. His name's Roger Coleman. Works with her at the same office. I didn't respond right away. The name meant nothing to me, but the fact that he was a coworker, that made my stomach churn. All those late nights Lisa claimed to be working overtime. Now I knew the truth. Frank's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. Same routine every time, he continued. They meet after work. She spends hours at his place before heading home like nothing happened. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white, but I kept my voice calm. Keep watching. Frank's updates were short and clinical, but each word landed like a blow to my chest. The next day he called again. She's still spending time with him at his house, he said. Same pattern. My jaw clenched, and I didn't say a word. And she's been sleeping with him every day, Frank added, his voice steady but cautious. She goes straight to his place after work, and they're together for hours. I felt the blood drain from my face. Every detail made it harder to breathe, but I held it together. A day later, I met with Frank and Richard in Richard's office. The room was dim, the blinds drawn. Richard sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, while Frank stood by the window, arms crossed. The air smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee. Richard broke the silence. We stick to the plan, he said firmly. Go home. Act normal. Don't give her any reason to suspect anything. Frank nodded. The evidence we've gathered is more than enough to make your case solid. But the longer you keep this under wraps, the better your position. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening. I understand, I said quietly. My voice sounded steady, even though I felt like I was about to collapse. Richard leaned forward, his gaze sharp. And remember, Mike, one slip up, and you lose your leverage. I nodded. The rage inside me hadn't gone away, but I knew they were right. If I wanted to come out of this on top, I had to play it smart. Richard leaned in, his expression sharp and deliberate. One last thing, Mike. Lose your temper, and you lose your leverage. Keep it together every second you're in that house. I nodded, taking a deep breath. We reviewed the plan once more before I left his office. The weight of it all pressed on my chest, suffocating, but I was determined to follow through. When I got home, Lisa was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. Her face lit up when she saw me. You're back, she said cheerfully, stepping toward me for a hug. I instinctively stepped back, lifting a hand. Wait, I said quickly, keeping my tone even. Someone at work tested positive for COVID. I'm not feeling great, just a sore throat. I don't want to risk getting you sick. Her concern was immediate. Oh no, are you okay? Do you have a fever? I shook my head. Just tired, but I'll stay in the guest room, just to be safe. She nodded. Of course. Let me know if you need anything. Tea, soup, whatever. I'll take care of you. Thanks, I replied with a forced smile. I'll manage. She lingered, then asked, do you think we should cancel the anniversary party? It's only a few weeks away. I shook my head. No need. I'll be fine. I'll use this time to plan it. Her face softened. That's sweet of you. I gave her another nod, keeping my mask firmly in place. Inside, I was far from calm. Later that night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't need to check to know it was Frank. She left work at lunch, he said flatly. She's at Roger's house again. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing, letting him continue. I sent you everything, photos, videos. It's all in your inbox. I hung up and stared at my phone for a moment before opening the email. There they were. Clear, undeniable proof of her betrayal. Lisa, walking into Roger's house. Them tangled together inside. For several minutes, I watched in silence, ball rising in my throat. My hand clenched around the phone, my knuckles white. If I wasn't her husband, I muttered coldly, I'd probably enjoy watching these videos. I shook my head. But now? She makes me sick. There was a pause on Frank's end before he spoke again. His tone was steady, measured. I know this isn't easy, Mike, but it's only a matter of time now. The next 7 days dragged by painfully. Every minute felt like torture, but I stuck to the plan. Lisa, completely unaware, carried on like nothing had changed. She was too wrapped up in her own world to notice mine crumbling beneath the surface. When the isolation ended, I forced myself to act normal. Lisa was eager to reconnect. That night, she slipped into bed beside me, her hand brushing against my arm. Come closer, she whispered softly. I'm still feeling weak, I said, my voice calm but distant. I'm not up for anything tonight. She frowned, pulling back. You've been sick, Mike. You should take it easy. I will, I said, nodding. Just need a little more time. The next morning, I booked a full STD panel. I needed to know if her betrayal had left me with more than just heartbreak. The clinic was efficient, but waiting for the results felt like an eternity. Back home, I started sending out invitations for the anniversary party. Family, friends, everyone we knew. The party was going to happen, and I was going to make sure it went exactly as planned. That afternoon, my phone rang. Josh and Megan called to confirm they'd both be there. Hearing their voices brought a flicker of warmth, but it didn't last long. I couldn't let myself feel anything beyond the task at hand. Later, Lisa approached me, her expression softer than usual. I love you, Mike, she said, her voice gentle. I'm so happy to have you as my husband. I gave her a small, empty smile. I know you are. A week later, the day of the party arrived. The house was full of guests. Laughter and conversation echoed through every room. People congratulated us, calling us lucky, saying how beautiful our years together had been. Lisa looked radiant, as always. She beamed, charming everyone she spoke to, her bright, practiced smile never wavering. But Roger was there too, with his wife. I couldn't stop myself from watching them. Lisa stayed glued to my side, laughing at the right moments, holding my arm as though we were a perfect couple. Roger stood nearby, pretending to be caught up in conversation, sneaking glances at her when he thought no one was looking. I hadn't invited anyone from my office. Lisa had found it odd. No one from work, she'd asked. They're tied up with a big project, I replied smoothly. I told them not to worry about it. It wasn't a complete lie, but I didn't want anyone from my job seeing what was about to unfold. This was my stage, and I was ready to perform. Her parents arrived shortly after, their faces glowing with pride. They hugged us, congratulating us on our anniversary, showering us with kind words. I forced a smile, nodding along, but inside, I was anything but happy. They had no idea what was about to happen. No one did. Lisa stayed glued to my side all evening, her hand resting on my arm, her laughter ringing out at all the right moments. She greeted every guest with practiced charm, showing everyone how perfect our marriage was. I let her play her part, but all I could think about was how long I'd have to keep up the act. The party was in full swing, guests mingling, laughing, clinking glasses. It all felt too perfect, too polished. But I knew better. This was just the calm before the storm. Then I saw them, Frank and Richard, standing by the entrance. My heart quickened. It was time. I gently pulled my arm out of Lisa's grasp. I've got something to take care of, I said. She smiled, oblivious, and continued working the room. She didn't have a clue. I walked toward the large screen we'd set up for the event. As I stepped in front of it, the lights dimmed, and everyone turned to face me. I took the microphone, steadying my nerves. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice calm, masking the storm inside me. It means a lot to Lisa and me. Guests nodded and smiled, raising their glasses. We've been married for 24 years and 6 months. Lisa's head snapped toward me, her brow furrowed. "No, honey," she whispered urgently. "It's 25 years. I gave her a knowing smile. "I'll explain." I turned to Frank, who carried a large, neatly wrapped gift. "Frank, would you please present the gift to Lisa?" Frank stepped forward. Lisa, still smiling, walked toward him, her parents by her side. She had no idea what was coming. Her father helped her unwrap the package. As the paper fell away, I could feel the tension in the room rising. Then the picture was revealed. Lisa froze, her smile vanishing. It was her and Roger, naked, tangled together. A scream tore from her throat, piercing the room's silence. Gasps followed, guests murmuring in shock. Her father turned to me, his face twisted in fury. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" I met his gaze, keeping my voice steady. "It's not a joke. That's a still frame from the video I'm about to show." Lisa's mother clutched her chest, her eyes darting between me and her daughter. Guests stared, stunned into silence. Frank moved to the laptop, clicking a few buttons. Moments later, the screen flickered to life, playing the video. Lisa's voice filled the room. "I'm just keeping him around to pay the bills." The words echoed like gunshots, cutting through the stunned crowd. I'd heard them before. The first time they hit me like a punch to the gut. But now, I was numb. I had prepared for this moment. Silence followed the video. Heavy, suffocating silence. Every eye in the room was on me. Then, cutting through the tension, a man in a black suit entered the room. He moved with purpose, calm and professional, as if he'd done this 100 times before. He stopped in front of Lisa, holding out a manila envelope. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice steady. "You've been served." Lisa stared at him, wide-eyed, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope. She didn't open it. Her eyes darted between the man and me. Confusion and panic etched across her face. Before she could speak, the man walked past her to Roger, who stood rigid, his face pale. "Mr. Coleman," the man said, handing him another envelope. "You've been served." Roger took it, his hand shaking. He glanced at Lisa, his face filled with guilt and fear. The man turned again, heading toward the CEO of their company, who stood frozen near the back of the room. "Mr. Thompson," he said as he handed over a third envelope. "You've been served." The CEO's face went pale. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a lawsuit," I answered coldly, stepping closer. "For failing to enforce your company's morality policy. Your employees weren't working. They were sneaking off to have an affair." The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. I turned to Roger, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "Roger, that's a lawsuit for alienation of affection. You wrecked my marriage. You're going to pay for it." Finally, I faced Lisa. "And you," I said, my voice steady but cold. "That envelope contains the divorce papers. Our marriage ended the day you decided to cheat." Lisa's lip trembled, tears filling her eyes. "Mike, please." "No," I cut her off. "We're done." Her tears fell, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't here to comfort her. I was here to make her face the consequences. The man in the black suit handed the CEO his envelope with the same practiced words. "Mr. Thompson, you've been served." The CEO, a man I'd once respected, took it with a furrowed brow, his face paling as he processed what was happening. What is this?" he stammered, his voice unsteady. The man didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out as swiftly as he had entered, leaving behind a stunned silence. I stepped forward, locking eyes with Thompson. "That," I said slowly, deliberately, "is a lawsuit for failing to enforce your company's morality policy. Your employees weren't working overtime. They were sneaking off to have sex." The room remained deadly silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Thompson's face twisted with confusion and anger, but I didn't care. He had turned a blind eye to what was happening under his watch. Next, I turned to Roger, the man who had shattered my marriage. "Mr. Coleman," I said, my voice firm, "you've been served for alienation of affection, for destroying my trust, for breaking up my family." The words echoed across the room, leaving Roger standing there frozen, guilt and panic etched across his face. But my focus had already shifted to Lisa, Her wide, trembling eyes met mine, and for a moment, I almost saw regret in them. But it was too late for that. "And Lisa," I said, my voice hardening, "you've just been served with divorce papers." Lisa's lips trembled, her eyes darting between me and her parents. "Mike," she whispered, tears beginning to fall. I didn't let her continue. "I said earlier we've been married for 24 years and 6 months. I continued, my tone cold. "That's true. But our marriage died 6 months ago, the day you chose to sleep with him." Her face crumpled, guilt flickering behind her tears. But I wasn't done. "I don't care why you did it," I said, my words cutting through the silence like a blade. "I don't need to know. Just get out of my house." The moment those words left my mouth, something inside me shifted. The anger, the heartbreak, all of it clicked into place. It was over. The days that followed were a whirlwind of chaos. Lisa's parents were relentless, calling me, showing up at the house, trying to reason with me. "Mike, you can't throw away 24 years, her father said firmly. "Think about your family. Think about your kids." Lisa's mother took a softer approach. "She's going through something," she pleaded, her voice full of concern. "Please don't end things like this. You two can work it out." But I wasn't interested. Their words meant nothing. The betrayal had cut too deep, and there was no coming back from it. Lisa, however, wasn't ready to give up. At the hearing, she made one last desperate attempt to explain herself. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me. "Mike, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been going through a lot. I have a hormone imbalance. That's why I needed more intimacy." "You still have to hear. Stunt." After everything, this was her excuse? I glanced at Richard, my lawyer, and saw the disbelief on his face. He didn't waste any time responding. "Ms. Turner," Richard began, his tone cool and professional, "you never informed my client about any hormone imbalance. In fact, we have found no medical records or doctor's reports to support your claim." Lisa flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor. She was clearly caught off guard. The judge, who had been quiet until that point, leaned forward, his expression stern. "Ms. Turner," he said, "if you were experiencing a medical condition that impacted your marriage, why didn't you inform your husband? Why didn't you seek treatment or attempt to address it together?" Lisa's silence stretched on, her frustration evident. She opened her mouth to speak, but the judge cut her off. "If this was a legitimate issue, it should have been communicated. The court finds no evidence to support your claim and no grounds for reconciliation." His words carried the finality I had expected. I sat there, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. I was done trying to understand her actions. There was nothing left to salvage. They didn't pick sides, but their silence spoke volumes. Jack and Emily were angry with Lisa for what she'd done, but they were angry with me too. They resented the way I'd exposed her, turning our private pain into a public spectacle. I couldn't blame them. I'd put everything on display, torn apart the life they knew. And even though I felt justified, I understood that my actions had hurt them. So, they stopped talking to both of us. They needed distance, their own way of processing the betrayal. As painful as it was, I respected their choice and gave them space. But it wasn't easy. The silence left a hole inside me, one that no amount of work or distractions could fill. Not knowing where I stood with my own kids was harder to bear than anything Lisa had done. Financially, life had changed too. The divorce settlement cut my assets in half. Everything I'd spent decades building was divided down the middle. Watching it slip away was tough, but I never regretted it. Lisa took her share, but I kept something more valuable: my dignity, my self-respect. Those things hadn't been touched. Roger wasn't faring much better. His wife had filed for divorce and hired Richard to represent her. I knew there was no way Roger was walking out of that without a major financial hit. He had played his part in destroying my marriage, and now his own was crumbling. It was only a matter of time before it all caught up with him. The CEO, on the other hand, was desperate to make the whole mess disappear. The public scandal was bad for business, and he had his own reputation to protect. It wasn't long before I got a call, arranging a quiet meeting. The offer was simple: $1 million for me to drop the case. They wanted silence, closure. and I was the key to both. By then, I wasn't interested in dragging things out. I had divorced Lisa, made my peace with what had happened, and wasn't looking for more revenge. If that money gave me the financial cushion to start over, I'd take it. So I did. I withdrew the case, signed the papers, and walked away with $1 million in my pocket. A quiet settlement to end the chaos. 3 years later, I'm sitting on the porch of my little farmhouse, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky is painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of colors you only get out here in the countryside. The air is crisp, clean, and peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. This place, this quiet, simple life, is exactly what I needed. I'm not alone. Max and Duke, my 2 German shepherds, sit by my feet, always watching, always protective. They aren't just pets. They're my companions, my guardians, a reminder that I'm safe now, that no one's going to hurt me again. The farm itself is small, nothing fancy or extravagant, but it's mine. I've spent the last year learning the ropes, feeding the chickens, fixing fences, working the land. There's a rhythm to it all, a quiet satisfaction in the daily routine. It's a far cry from the life I left behind, but it's the life I've grown to love. Out here, time moves slower. The seasons change, the land shifts, and I've stopped rushing through life. I've learned to savor the little moments. The sound of birds in the morning, the rustle of wind through the trees, the way the light changes as the day ends. It's a simple life, but it's real. It's grounding. It's what I needed to find myself again. What's even more surprising is that Jack and Emily have started visiting again. The 2 people I thought I had lost forever are slowly coming back into my life. It's still awkward at times. We're all navigating new territory, trying to rebuild what was broken. But every visit feels like progress. The walls between us are starting to come down. We don't talk about the past. Instead, we talk about the farm, about their lives, about things that feel lighter, easier. I've stopped trying to fix things. I'm just here for them when they need me. And that's enough. As for Lisa, I've heard bits and pieces about her. She's living with her parents now, from what I gather. She's in therapy, trying to work through everything that happened. I never expected things to be easy for her. She's facing her own demons. And while it's not my problem anymore, I can't help feeling a small pang of empathy. She made her choices, and now she's paying for them. But it's hard to completely shut off the part of me that once loved her. Still, I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I've let all of that go. Out here, in this quiet place, I've learned something important. Holding on to rage keeps you chained to the past. And I refuse to live in the past any longer. I've moved on. I've made peace. For the first time in years, I'm happy. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of birdsong. The wind whispers through the trees. Max and Duke bark occasionally, chasing after squirrels or rabbits. The world feels calm, steady, and so do I. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.